Great job. Great company. Oh, this is definitely me. Okay. Well, I think this is running. And so maybe it'd be fun to just talk about form submission, the process of the, request response cycle. So this person, can you see the screen?
Mhm.
This person built an app with companies and jobs. And so I think that the relationship is that a company has many jobs and a job belongs to a company.
Makes
And,
sense.
and so here we are on the form to submit a new company. And we're going to practice talking about code as colleagues and kind of try to deepen our understanding and practice articulating what the heck is going on here.
Cool.
So do you want me to, do you want to type something in and see what happens? Or do you want to just talk about it and then see if it matches the expectation of reality? If the reality matches the expectation.
Yeah, I'm fine with either way.
All right.
Yeah, once you decide.
All right. So we get an alert and that's it. Not great.
That's it. Yeah.
Not what I would expect to happen, but now let's kind of talk through it. So where do you want to start?
Well, I guess I want to see real quick in the browser if we go back to, is there like a company? Oh, that is company list.
Well,
Job
we're on the
list.
new company page, so that didn't
Yeah.
change. We can inspect and see if there's anything in the console. Okay, we got this kind of error, but this
A
is like
warning,
a,
but yeah. If we hit, what happens if we hit the home link? Is it actually?
okay. So it kind of looks like it was not successful. But instead of troubleshooting, let's just focus on the
Okay,
talking.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like ready to
Yeah.
debug it.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, if we're talking, we got to start on the front end, right?
Okay. So we go
I
to
suppose.
figure out which component this was. Probably new company.
Yeah. Um, okay. So I'm going to be looking for a controlled form here. So I'm going to be looking for some state at the top of the file. What do we have here? This is a whole bunch of styling. Yeah. There's some state, some form data. Okay.
And
So
here
we
that
have
makes sense because there's
initialize.
really only that's all we got one input box. So
Right. Yeah, totally. So then we have initializing state there with an object with a key value pair. Um, and then if we go down to the form, so when I'm talking through this with students, I like to ask them, you know, what piece of code runs right after the button is clicked, typically,
yeah,
right? When you
right.
submit the form. And we should probably back up. Even before that, we should look at line 99, I suppose, right? Is that what that is? Where the handle changes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have an event there listening for a change on that input element. And when it changes, we have a handle change functions living on line 66. So we're going to call the state updater, state setter. I've heard different terminologies on that. What have you heard?
I would use setter.
Setter, state setter function. Passing in an object here. We're using the spread operator to create a copy of initialized state. And then we're using some bracket notation. We have e.target.name. So we're using this event. Yeah. Yep. So the name attribute of the input element is being accessed through the event. Events is something that I need to learn more about. I'm just not really sure. That's sometimes they're created, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you want to, rely on them. Sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway, we have this
I'm
event
sure it's a
object.
deep like field. Yeah, I mean, we essentially use very small parts of the event object and
Yeah, yeah,
rely on that.
yeah, yeah. So we're using the event object so that we can get the name attribute as well as the value attribute of the target of the event. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
This
Yeah,
is so interesting because this state is so simple,
hmm
but I actually like the form data. I mean, I was working with a student who had like 9 different states, each input had its own state. And I was like,
Right.
maybe you could refactor this to be an object with key value pair. So this is a nice form, a little bit over the top since there's only one input, but it's all right.
Agreed. Yep. Agreed. Same thing. That's what I was thinking too. Oh well. Um, yeah, I like this approach too. It's a little bit cleaner, so you don't have to have so much state. So we're keeping track of any change made to state as the user inputs. We could probably see that in live time or in the DevTools if we wanted to. And then once the submit button is clicked, the handle submit function will run. We're going to use edot to prevent default on line 71 to prevent any refreshes. Then there's alert that popped up. We saw that. 73 updated form data. We're going to say we're creating a copy here of form data. We have an object. Okay.
Kind of unnecessary. I don't know what
Yeah,
this,
yeah. I think that's unnecessary too. Yeah.
but
Redundant.
there's
Don't
the
need to do
larger
that.
thing about copies and like pointers and like where is it stored? And
Yeah, references versus yeah, I know what you mean. So now we're making a fetch request to companies. We want to go ahead and this is going to be a post request. We have our setting our headers there, content type application / JSON. We have a body that we're going to include, and we need to call the stringify method so that we can turn this updated form data JavaScript object into JSON or a string. Essentially, I think it's JSON, but um, then
I'm actually not 100% clear why this is necessary. It's just a great example of a piece of code that's just like provided and never did the work to like dig into why it's necessary. I do know that when you do active storage, you do forms differently. You don't send this content type, and you don't stringify, otherwise it breaks. And so it's not like it's always like that. It's like there's something operating here, but again, that there's part of the balance and challenge here is to understand enough and not get hung up on the fact that you don't understand every single thing. Like, how deep of a rabbit hole is this to get into to make sense of it? And maybe it's not that deep. Maybe it would only take about 15 minutes of like reading to understand why do we use JSON.stringify.
right. And if you came to a project or a situation where it became the thing that you needed to learn more about, then you could. But
Right.
it's not necessarily worth exploring all of the little things all of the time. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so assuming the post is successful, if our promise is resolved, we then enter to line 81.
Yeah, but I think I
Um,
would shift to the back end now to follow up on it, because this
oh
is
yeah,
really
yeah,
the
yeah,
distinction between phase 2 and phase 3. Like, you control what's happening in the back.
right. Yep, agreed. So we want to go to the controller and take a look at the. Pardon
Oh,
me.
This is unique. They don't usually do this in phase 3.
Yeah, separate controllers. Yeah. Let's go into the application controller first just to see what's in there. Uh,
That's fun.
okay. All right. So I guess we'll go to companies. Okay, so now we have a route at the top there, line 2 companies. So that should be the action. I think it's called an action. Um,
Yeah.
that we want to run, right? So companies, I don't like it when people don't put spaces on the equal signs. We're going to.
Yeah, but this isn't the get request.
Oh yeah, you're right. We're doing a post request, so
And
we're
that
on line line 12.
this explains why nothing happened.
Um, yeah, it does. It does explain that
Here we are.
we are hitting a pry.
Well, cool. We can do a little bit of work in there. I just a quick point, because when I talk about this in phase 4, people jump into, and there's a lot more happening in phase 4, but it is really important. Like, that you're going to the company's controller, but it is important to look at the application controller. There's not a lot happening here, but this makes me again wonder about, like, what do I not know about Sinatra base? I do know that this config is much simpler in Sinatra than it is in Rails.
Yeah.
And I don't like, this is a pretty simple file. We do everything in development. We don't write tests. This controls where it ends up, where the actual database ends up. This adapter I've learned something about because I'm wrestling with PostgreSQL issues, and so I've had some people just give up on it and go back to SQLite 3. I don't know that I've done a whole lot here, but I guess this is setting the default environment to development. But yeah, this is again a place where it's like thinking about the environment. What do we really know? What do we not know about how all this works? All right, so we got to post companies. We hit the binding. We haven't run this, which is why we can't see anything showing up in the front end.
Yep.
Anything we show people, like, what do you do if you have a binding? The whole point of having a binding in the back end.
Yeah. So you can, like, if students aren't sure. So for example, the student that is having the issue with the response.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this would be a good exercise to go through with her to, I like to ask them, what tools do we have available to look under the hood here? Can we
Right.
inspect, what parameters we are receiving at this action? Can
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
try, yeah,
Well,
what
I think
should be,
params is a great place to start.
yeah,
Oh, and I also think
that looks
it's
good.
worth pointing out that the gem file is the thing that controls the debugger that I have access to. So if you don't know, you want to look at your gem file to know whether you debug or RDBG, which is debugger, or pry, so that you're aware of that. Because there's a transition in phase 3 and 4 where you haven't been doing this because you haven't had a backend. And so all of a sudden now you have these new tools and you have to learn how to use them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, basically a larger point, aside from looking at the params, is that you have access to every to all your models and all the active record methods, and so you can do anything you want. This is a console, essentially, same as doing rake console. Puts us into a place where we can write Ruby code. Puts hello world. And we see both the output of the terminal and the return of the line of code that was run. So I don't think there's anything wrong with their create. Doesn't look like it to me.
Right. Yeah.
Because the company's
So
only attribute is its name. The other ones are created, added, updated, add an ID, and all those happen automatically. So we should be able to release the binding, which I think is exit soft release. So at that point, and I also think terminal work is useful, like practicing reading the terminal. What does it say about what happened?
you mean like the sequel?
Yeah, just the messages that are here. Like,
Yeah.
Obviously before we even hit this binding, there were some GET requests that were executed, which is probably built into the front end.
Yeah, it's got to be.
And here we can see the commit transaction. So that's a good sign that the company was now created.
Begin transaction.
And it's interesting because this post companies, I would have expected to see earlier rather than later, but it's like there's that's a different layer of like understanding, is how does this particular server like tell you a log of what's happened, and how can you use that to be helpful to you when you're struggling. But when you're at the beginning, this is just like, I mean, we got to kind of cut this out to see the log without the binding stuff in the middle. But and when you make changes in the back end, this will automatically kind of rerun and release. So just let's pick up the story here. Company.create. Yeah. We took in name. We saw that params had a key of name. So params name would be German Brewing Company.
Yeah, and we're calling the toJSON method on that, which should be the new company.
Right, because the return of company.create is the company object, the instance of the company, and therefore we're kind of, I mean, this is on 3 lines, but really this is like 1 line of code.
Yeah.
A good example of chained methods.
Yep. With the create method and then toJSON. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder whether students understand, like, to understand the line of code, you have to, okay, read this part first and think about it, what it returns, and then read that with the understanding that this is basically company object dot to JSON, because that's what company.create returned.
Right.
So now we're ready to head back to the front end with our response. And we're picking up the story here, and it's useful to like drag this up so I don't have to keep switching back and forth.
Okay, so assuming all that went well, and the promise that fetch returns has been resolved successfully. We have line 81. We have a response now. We called the adjacent method on that, which the documentation said something like parses the stream into JavaScript data.
Yeah, and I think it's like I kind of learned something that, or at least I think I learned something that was only clear when I looked at the actual response coming back. So now that we took the oh yay, it's there. Okay. Whatever, Macy's. So this response, then it was a helpful connection for me because it's the body of the request that carries the important information, and it's the body of the response that also carries the important information. And that's what the 2JSON is working on, this readable stream. Because if you click here, it doesn't tell you what it is. It just says it's a readable stream. So then the 2JSON is converting the body of the response, because nothing, if you look at all this other stuff, it obviously doesn't have anything about this company object in it. So it must be the body that it's coming back in.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that's important. Again, you can, just use that. That's like standard .then resp arrow resp.json, and like does its thing. Okay, great.
Yep. So makes sense now. More documentation makes more sense now. So the JSON method is it's called readable stream. Is that what it said there?
Yeah. Body.
Cool. Okay.
And then when you click on it didn't have anything. It was like parentheses ... but when you click on it, it just says readable stream.
Mm-hmm. So it is working on that stream and parsing it into JavaScript. Yeah. When that line, when that promise is resolved from the then method there on line 81, we should then wind up with some JavaScript data, which is why we have that parameter set there on line 84. Once that's resolved, that's also what triggers the then on line 84. So now we can do some stuff with our JavaScript data. We have this callback function we're passing into the then method. We have some data. We want to go ahead and call add company now and pass the data to add company.
Yeah, and I think it's useful again to like know what this is and name it properly, because data sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. You're
Generic,
just naming it very generally, right? And so it's like just make the connection between your action in the back end and what you sent back and what you've got here in your second promise. So now,
so something like new company or some new company object or something like that.
Exactly. Let's see, Maxwell Street. So now the first one is the response. There's that, but then the second one is this, and this is the company object that we said we were going to send back. So this is the JavaScript version of the company that we just created. And if we jump into a console and we say,
companies.
Do I need to do bundle exec right console?
Oh, wait, we don't have.
I'm not in the right folder. CD phase 3 project React project. Oh. The name of this? Oh, Sinatra React console. So if we do company.last, right? This is the Ruby version of an object. And what we're looking at on the other side is the JavaScript version. And that's what 2JSON is doing for us. It's just turning this thing into a JavaScript object.
Yeah.
So to me, those kinds of things are little hints that they don't fully understand that. Even if they're like using it, I mean, they are using it properly, I think, because it's coming back and it's working. But then
Yeah.
take the time to name it properly. New company object. You don't need this anymore. New company object.
Mhm.
Cool. And then obviously we're headed off to, well, we got to figure out
Probably a callback function. Yeah.
where this came from. We got to get to the parent component. Where is new company situated? Main
Not
container,
there, surprisingly. Main container, that makes sense, I guess.
new company, add
Uh,
company.
yeah.
There it is. So,
Yep. And then we're using the state setter function and creating a copy of the state.
yeah. Although
And
this is a perfect example of where they forgot, or I don't know what state I was, maybe I don't know if this was an assessment or a student I was helping, but they may have forgotten that
include the associated data. Is that what you're thinking?
yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So, but no, they just didn't do it at all, right? But they should have done it on all of these. Includes jobs, includes jobs, includes jobs. Not that one, obviously,
Yeah.
doesn't really matter, but just to be consistent. And then so this is just sort of in an unfinished state, right? They have more work to do because
Yeah.
right now they probably have more state than they need to because, well, it's
They're
not
not
there.
using their associations.
Exactly. They probably have a jobs and a companies, and that's not necessary. Right.
Yeah,
So that's the first
100%.
thing to get rid of is to delete that, get the associations working, and then kind of lean into it. Cool. Well,
Agreed.
I think that was useful and will be useful to some phase 3 students.